What we'd like to do today is really just raise awareness and share our learning from our project. So I'm here to talk about the sort of overall partnership and the benefits and the challenges, and Helen in particular focusing around inclusion. So to start, our project, it's a 2-year funded project from Arts Council England, and it's part of the Volunteer Futures programme. I've got a graphic there with the different partners there, Newcastle Gateshead Cultural Venues. So you can see we have, a mix of art galleries, museums, theatres, music venues, children's literature, life, and like a health science project. I've put a link there to our website that'll give further information on the different partners and our offer as a group. And there's two main elements to the project. Targeting people who face barriers. Now, all the different partners have different target groups. So we have some who are interested in young people, people from particular areas, neurodiverse, LGBTQ+. Tyne Wear Museums, our main sort of target group for this project is around diversity and inclusion. And we're very much trying to target people who wouldn't necessarily think of volunteering or working in museums. And the reason we chose volunteer here is, again, it's something that you see all over. You see it in shop windows. But we chose that name really just to make the point that culture, heritage, raise awareness that there are volunteering opportunities and quite a broad range of opportunities within the sector there. So again, targeting people who face barriers. And then the other big part of the project is looking at volunteering through a different lens. And again, I caught a few things from the keynote speech, which opened today, around reshaping the volunteering landscape, adapting volunteering, embracing digital. And the way I look at the second point there is around just trying new approaches and trying new things. Again, came up earlier in the keynote speech. I'm quite old-fashioned in terms of volunteering, where I got to be quite formal and structured and application forms and processes. But one of the things I've learned personally through this project is, again, the idea around micro volunteering, short-term volunteering, and the need to maybe move away from the formal side and make volunteering much more accessible. So those are the two main bits. Next slide, please, Helen. So again, the strengths of the project. There's a very strong shared learning element and offering a platform for discussion. Helen's going to talk a lot more in detail around the inclusivity, supporting people with disabilities element. But that's been a real strength of the project, just to be able to talk things through, have really useful and sometimes challenging discussion, but providing that network of support. And I've put on there honest discussion. And just a quick example, I've volunteered myself. I've worked in a volunteer centre. I've set up volunteering projects, and I've supported a number of volunteers in my time. But I've never worked in the culture and heritage sector before I started this post. So when I started, I went out. First thing I did is arrange meetings with all the different partners. And again, I thought, really nice bunch. Said to my manager before our first partner meeting, we have quarterly partner meetings, as well as like themed meetings and training. But I said to my manager after meeting everyone, I just hope we have some honest discussion around where we are, what our needs are, and how we're going to approach this project. At the very first meeting, when we were doing the introductions and updates, very first person said, I just want to say I'm really struggling. I don't know where to start. I've got 10 different jobs to do. There's only three of us, and I just feel overwhelmed and I just really need help. And following that, everyone was saying, do you know, I feel the same, or I have these concerns and I'm not really sure. And I just thought that that's been a real highlight of the project, just having honest discussion, which has then led to partners supporting each other. Um, Two main things here coming up around something that I've really picked up on is between the partnership, there's been a real sort of desire to get it right, uh, to put time into developing infrastructure and processes and policies, but approaching it right, and a real genuine desire to not exploit people. Next slide, please, Helen. It's important to note that within the partnership, some of the on the challenges, some of the partners have never involved volunteers within their organizations before, literally starting from scratch. So it's about understanding what volunteering is. It's about culture change within an organization. It's about getting staff on board, staff buy-in, and that's before you get to the infrastructure bit around, processes and policies, then design and role descriptions, recruitment and retention and ongoing support. So some of our partners have really come a long way, and I do feel that there's a really strong element of Tyne Wear Museums, for example, one of the more experienced partners sharing knowledge and experience and guidance on processes. Also worth pointing out that we have specialist support from a number of agencies. So Volunteer Centre Newcastle are involved to advise on, again, the legal bits Karen tends to say, again, processes, policies, infrastructure. And then we have additional partners that advise around target groups. So those are Children Northeast and Street Games, and they're helping us to understand hard to reach young people and sort of target that that target group. So what we found in terms of challenges, and again, what came up on the previous session is we could probably do a full hour session around challenges, and I'm sure people will identify with these, but what we found is terms of staff capacity, staff turnover within the sector. Some of our partners are on their third or fourth member of staff being involved in the project, so that can be a challenge where where people are coming in halfway through. Financial situation, again, I'm sure people will identify, but also the idea of competing demands, real issue there. It's worth pointing out though that despite the challenges that we're all facing, the general sort of feedback that we've had from our partners is that everybody feels in a much better place around volunteering. I think that's really positive, and that there's been a genuine feeling of kind of momentum building. And when you bear in mind that some of the partners completely new, you can measure our journeys differently, but some of the partners have come a really long way. Next slide, please, Helen. I should have said at the beginning as well that we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so we do have questions at the end, but please feel free to use the chat. So the last slide for me is I wanted to focus on the culture change staff buy-in element. It was at one of my regular catch-ups with one of the partners who raised the issue that they had some concerns from staff, understandably, that are we using volunteers to replace paid staff? Didn't really understand what volunteering was, not really sure how to approach supporting volunteers. Basically, no experience with volunteering. So they asked if there was any training available for staff. I had a look around. I couldn't find anything, specific. So I basically just developed a session myself. I didn't want to call it managing volunteers or supervising volunteers because I thought that could maybe put some people off, or it might imply additional, responsibilities if it's a sensitive sort of area. So called it supporting volunteers effectively. And basically what I did was I covered, the definition of volunteer and what volunteering is, the reasons why people volunteer. Really important bit is around barriers some people face. Um, good, the importance of having, infrastructure in place, like accurate role descriptions, the importance of getting the first contact right, and investing time in induction and the early stages, and then some good tips and techniques just around, formal and informal supervision and support. So we've ran this session about 12, 15 times. It's been really interesting because we found different people will pick up on different parts of it. Like, for example, frontline staff who will be working alongside volunteers, you can almost see it as you do in the session. You can kind of see them relax a bit and think, oh, well, actually, it's not about, roles being at risk and at threat. It's about, helping people who might need a bit of support into, just moving on, progressing generally. We've had a lot of positive responses in terms of staff following this session. Again, wanting to come more involved in writing role descriptions. We've had, other staff, quite senior staff, realize the importance for, induction and role descriptions. And I was asked to go in and run the session. It takes about an hour at one of the partners' senior management team meetings, and they said, look, we've got a few other things on the agenda. Can you stick to half an hour? I said, absolutely. I went in, and honestly, they wanted a discussion on every single slide. And ended up being there over 2 hours, and it was me saying, look, you're the one who wanted us to stick to it. And what they said was, no, actually, we'd like to focus on this today. And you could almost see things changing in the room. One of the issues that they had, again, around not wanting to exploit people, was one of the members of staff was saying, we should be paying everyone. We shouldn't be using volunteers. We should be paying everyone for what they're doing. And I said, right, well, fair point. But what you need to think about is not everyone's doing it for payment. Not everybody wants or needs payment. And I said, there's also the idea if anybody's on benefits, unless you can afford to pay them 16 hours a week or anything, you're actually causing some problems by sticking to that. So you need to kind of look at it differently. And again, you could see things change in the room. So again, as an offer, if anybody's interested in the session, I'm more than happy to run one online, and I can talk you through, sort of how the need for it came about and how the session evolved. So just a couple of quotes to finish on.
Yeah, sorry, there was actually someone in the chat who'd asked if you would share it. So that's an answer to that. We'll make sure we put our email addresses in the chat.
Yeah, great. Again, more than happy to do that. And just a couple of quotes there that people have said, and a lot of it is, I mean, not everyone, but some people think, volunteers are, just, I make the point around volunteering being an individual thing, looking at everything different. And when people become more aware of the barriers that some people face, again, it really makes a difference. And then the final one is, I've had a couple of people say, do you know what, I fancy volunteering for, pet charity or anything. And after doing this session, it's actually encouraged me to do it. So great. I'm pleased somebody's asked for that. The offer's there. Again, happy to arrange a session there. So just to hand over to Helen, big part of the project is around is around sort of shared learning, and we've had a training program where we've had, I think I had a quick look, we've done about 25 sessions, and we've had 200 staff and volunteers engage in those sessions. We have a target of 650 volunteers, and with 4 months to go, we've hit 900. So we've, we're sort of above and beyond where we wanted to be. Now, the shared learning element, we've covered, a number of different areas. But I worked with an organization in a previous role, Percy Headley, and they are a college that supports young people with quite complex disabilities. So I invited them in just to do a discussion session on, what we could do to support people with disabilities into our organizations. And it was a really inspiring session. The young people did a presentation. They were really nervous. It was a brilliant presentation where they basically said, we're just looking for new experiences for things that we haven't had the opportunity to do. And following that one information session, it really sparked a lot of interest and a lot of work from the partners. And what came back from the partners was, after doing that, not only am I kind of inspired, it's brilliant and motivated, but I now think it's something that we could do. And from that, it's just grown and grown. So with that in mind, I'll hand over to Helen, who will go into a bit more detail.
Great. So I'm going to chat just very quickly about some of the things we've been doing within our organisation as part of this project. So for us, the starting point for us was when we were gaining all this information and having all these chats within the partnership, was then taking that and making some small changes, because they can make a big difference. So for us, Anthony mentioned his general training about supporting volunteers. What I then created was a more specific training for internal use of organization, very specifically about what our program is, what we expect from what we call volunteer supervisors, what we don't expect from them. And that has helped create sort of a little bit of change in that there are people within our organisation that aren't necessarily as scared as having volunteers as they were, and that they understand the process a bit more, that it's not going to take up as much of their time as they thought. We've also made changes in our application process. We've made it simple. We've got a lot less when I started. The questions are worded differently. We've also reduced the need for 2 references down to 1. We've changed how we create new roles. So it's much more of a collaborative process with the different venues. And also we've added more information in there. So looking for things like, is it a noisy venue? Is it an uneven surface? Is it accessible by steps? Is there a ramp? Things like that that we actually now write into our role description, so volunteers have as much information as they need. We also use a volunteer inclusion plan, which we got from Newcastle Volunteering Centre, and they developed it. It's a form to fill out with a volunteer that has sort of stated that they have support needs of any sort, and it's a really good way of asking questions without worrying that you're asking them in the wrong way or asking the wrong questions. And it's things like, to volunteer, I need, if I'm struggling, you will see. And it's been very useful for us in a number of different situations. And then also individually, I'm part of organisation-wide efforts to improve inclusion. So the Staff Access Working Group, we're also working towards Autism Awareness Award. So I'm able to sort of get volunteering into those wider organisation efforts as well. I wanted to talk about, if the slide actually moves on, one of our projects that's come out of the volunteering here project, Access to Volunteering Group. So we've set it up in partnership with Autism Able and Percy Headley, who are 2 local organisations to us that work with those with disability. It started out of a need from, I had a budget as part of this project and I wanted to spend the money on something that was genuinely useful, and I didn't want to just sit as an able person and guess at what might be useful. And then it's developed from that, really. So Autism Mabel and Percy Headley helped me set up the group and make sure that it was as inclusive and accessible. So I was able to use their experience where I might have lacked. They helped recruit some of their members, but also we recruited from within our own volunteering as well. And they've led the group, really. So they decide what's being talked about and what projects we're doing. And we've gone on to do some really great projects, but also to have some really interesting debates as well. There was a great debate that was had about the need to preserve physical heritage versus the need to create access. So that was really interesting. You can see there some really interesting quotes from the group as well, that it's special to bring our ideas to a group. People don't normally think about what we want. And it makes someone else feel happy and welcome by creating the bag, which is the next slide, makes me happy. And to quote one of the members who was very excited when I said I was talking about them today, let's make this a trend. Let's make this a national trend. So the sport bag is one of the projects that's come out of that group. We took the idea that some of your venues might have, where there's a sensory bag available to visitors that a visitor can use to improve their visit. And we've adapted that and created a bag. This is the prototype you can see there, to help a volunteer shift. So yes, you've got the fidgets. We've also added a weighted blanketing, which is like a lap size, so it won't get caught up in wheels, for example, for a wheelchair user. We've got the magnifying sheet. We've also got coloured overlays for those that might need it, a wedge for working at an angle. And what we're also going to include is a visual story of the behind the scenes areas, like where would a volunteer have lunch? Where would they find staff in an office? Where's the staff toilet? Things like that. And also instructions on how to change settings on a computer. The feedback we've had from that has been fantastic. So I've taken it to all of our staff. We have a big staff meeting, and the feedback from there was, can we have one for staff too? So it's really great that it's starting off these wider conversations as well. And then I also wanted to talk about Michael. Well, actually, I'm going to let him talk because I'm going to show you a video. So Michael is a volunteer that came to us by Percy Headley. We created the volunteer role bespoke for Michael with them, and it's been really successful. So I'm just going to stop sharing that so that I can start sharing something else. Hopefully you can see that now, and fingers crossed, I've clicked the button that will share sound. At the end of it, yeah. Sorry. So we jinxed it. Oh no.
Job to do, yeah. It's rubbish. Picking the rubbish. So your dentist stopped you from doing anything at work? You could do all of the jobs. Job. Yeah. Job. Would you like to get a job here? Yeah.
And so I just go back to the other screen. But for us, just to give to Percy Headley Foundation, who created that video and gave us permission to share it. But for us, it's been working with Michael and Percy Headley has been so valuable in that it's proven that a volunteering role like this can work. And so now some of our other venues are now creating similar roles with
all these
other
apps on you.
organizations.
roar
So
of the
that's really
crowd,
good. Sorry. I think it's coming in right now.
the players, the fans, you know, the officials. It weighs on you.
Vimeo decided to continue playing a different video in the background there. We definitely jinxed it by saying there'd be no technical issues this time. But as I was saying, it's led to other venues creating similar roles, which is fantastic. So what I'd like to do now is get out into breakout rooms for 10 minutes. Great, thank you. So if we have 5 minutes or so of feedback from what you've chatted about, and then we'll do some question and answers. And I know there was a question that came up in the chat at the beginning that we thought was very interesting, and we'll try and talk about that as well. So does anybody want to feedback from what they discussed in their rooms? No volunteers. If you do volunteer, feel free to put your hand up, like press the button to put your hand up, and I can call on you. Oh, Francine, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, in our group, one of our group members, Sheila, kindly shared that there's a Curating for Change organisation,
yeah,
that has online experiences of people with disabilities. So I'm going to go and take a look at that.
Yeah, very, very well pointed out. Thank you. I was at the Museums Association conference recently, and I sat in on their session there, and yeah, they do some really interesting. Also have a resources section on their website as well, which I haven't had a proper look at yet, but I do intend to. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Anyone else?
Hi there. Yeah, sorry, I can't seem to be able to put my hand up.
That's all right.
I just I suppose I have done in the past. I have also partnered up with organizations, and we now have volunteers that came specifically for a scheme called Stepping Stones from our volunteer center, and we have volunteers, neurodiverse volunteers, volunteering with us. And I suppose my advice, and what I wish, I had known at the time is like, with volunteers with disabilities, and they're happy and they like the role, they're likely to stay forever, which is amazing. But I would say, like, as well as the partnering, you need to think about the long term and what happens when you move on, when other volunteers move on. So, for example, we had someone who came with a buddy who was trained by the volunteer center, and they volunteered for about 2 years together, and then the buddy moved on. But the young man with neurodiversity stayed. He still volunteered with us, and I don't have the budget to train other bodies. Well, we have a lot of volunteers who are very happy to step up and to support. They are not trained, and currently I'm not able to provide that training. And it works well because they have met as volunteers and they have connected, and we have a team that supports them. But what I would say, what I need to think about is what I need to embed these roles and the support, so that after I have moved on and other volunteers have moved on, the volunteers who are neurodiverse, if they want to carry on, that they can, even after everything. So it has to be embedded. So I suppose my advice is not just the partnering, but it's just thinking about what happens afterwards. That's when the work begins, and to make sure that, because for people with disabilities, volunteering becomes such a big part of the routine, which is very important. So you don't want to let them down. You want to be able to keep providing that for them as an organization. So yeah, so it's what happens after the partnering, and how do you keep supporting that? How do you embed that within your structure? And I'm providing, but also would say also making sure that you provide training an awareness training for volunteers working with alongside volunteers who are neurodiverse or who have disabilities, but also the staff. And because we did have from the volunteer center, they came and trained some of our staff, but they have moved on since. So it's about, just maintaining it, I would say.
Yes, absolutely. That's a really good point. Thank you. It's something we've debated about long and hard, as well as that legacy, the embedding, and the making sure it's not just a change for the length of the project, that something carries on after the project ends. So yeah, thank you. Is there anyone else that had any feedback before we moved on to the questions?
Hiya. Sorry, I just wanted to, we were chatting about in our group, so I'm involved with the Shaping the Future with Volunteering with the Royal Voluntary Service, and they're doing a big piece of, they did a big piece of research on disabled volunteers. Now the report, I've just checked, the report isn't like publishable yet, but they're still working on it. But there is a list of recommendations that came out of it, which I can just pop in the chat so you can have a look at them. And it's worth keeping an eye out, because the vision for volunteering stuff on disabled volunteers is growing. So if you keep an eye on the Royal Voluntary Service stuff, there should be stuff on there. But I'll just pop the recommendations in the chat for now.
That's fantastic. That's really useful. Thank you. That's great. So moving on to the questions. There was one question in the chat earlier that we wanted to bring up, really, was when Anthony was talking about sort of staff buy-in, someone asked in the chat, well, are volunteers staff? And I think that's a debate that we've had within our partnership. I know the lady that we work with at Newcastle Volunteer Centre would have a very, very strict sort of no. So for us personally, when we work in our organisation, staff are the people that are contracted. Volunteers are part of the workforce, but not necessarily staff, because we don't pay them. They're not contracted. But I suppose it's just interesting in what your individual's organization's definition is of those words. But yeah, definitely brings out a sort of debate in there's sometimes within our organization a fear that volunteers are coming in to take over jobs. And that's absolutely not the case. And so we've been very careful about the language we've used around volunteering to make it clear that volunteers are wonderful and we really appreciate them, but they're not here to replace what you do. I don't know if anyone else has anything they would want to add to that. Yes, yeah, sorry, just so other people saying in the chat there that we clearly note that volunteers are not staff, and that's how Volunteer Scotland sees it. Volunteers are part of our team, but not part of our staff. So yeah, so that's
sorry, can I just say
reassuring
something?
In some ways that
sorry, can I just say something? As we are all
absolutely, of course you can.
We are all staff. We have no paid members at all. So
that's fair enough. Yeah. So in an organisation where there are no staff, perhaps it's not as it that distinction doesn't exist. Yes.
No.
Yeah. So thank you for pointing that out. It's as I said, for an organisation like ours where we do have the staff, the paid staff, sorry, to make that distinction. For us, we do think about that language. But yes, thank you very much, Jeff, for starting off that debate a little bit. It's an interesting one. Does anyone else have any other questions? And yes,
I was just going to say, we used to have a contract in our volunteer policy until we were advised by NCVO not to do that, because it would appear to give people legal rights that they don't actually have. The legal structure for volunteers is quite different from that for paid employees. What we do instead is try to give them the same rights through our organisation, but they're not legally enforceable.
That's really interesting.
We do think, similar. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me that there's like a definite sort of use of language around, rather than volunteer contract, it's volunteer agreement.
Yeah.
Or if we say job description, we'll get told off, so we'll say role description. So I think sometimes there can be a clear, and I guess it's around the legalities, but Helen's summed it up there. We're quite fortunate to get some really good support from our volunteer centre around that. So interesting point though, Jeff. And I mean, my view is, you know, in some ways, you know, like Helen said, part of a workforce, but legally, you know, employed staff and volunteers, there's bound to be some differences.
Great. Does anyone else have any further questions quickly before we wrap up? I'll just check the chat there.
I think I'd just say that, oh, sorry, Ben, just quickly on that, I try to agree with everything that's just been said with the volunteers versus staff, but I try and put staff /volunteers in everything I do, just because I think it was a workforce cultural change for us 3 years ago to take on volunteers. We had a very staunch, unite, militant, you know, thing going on with restructures in the council at Bradford Museums, and volunteers was a bit of a dirty word at first, but over 3 years of an inclusive programme and making sure they're doing roles that are complementary, not instead of, I think that's kind of helped.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And I think it's a really good point, because you don't want anybody feeling that they're being included and they're not part of a workforce. So I suppose there's a bit of a balance there. Yeah, absolutely.
And actually, when people accept their new volunteers, suddenly they love them, and all that trade union stuff's gone out the window, and they're actually more protective and saying, why aren't we paying him? Why aren't we doing this? Why is he going? Yeah. Why aren't we keeping him? And they get actually really emotional, don't they? So the whole thing changes. But I think initially, now in every strategy, in every role description for jobs, I put in, you work with volunteers and staff, you know, /. It's in every part of the strategic document from the organisation, from the top down.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
So I think that's us for time now. So thank you everyone for your really good points, and hopefully really good discussions had in the breakout rooms as well.